Hello and welcome to this video, which is about a free synthesizer. Now that in itself is something I could probably do a video on every week for the next 4 years. There's a lot of them about. Some of them are interesting, some of them less so. Often they are people's passion projects, and that's a great thing, and there's a lot of choice, but there is a lot of overlap. A lot of them you've probably seen it all before, and if you've had anything as wacky as the Green Oak Crystal, probably not going to be that much of a surprise. But this one I think is worthy of note. It's from Cherry Audio. They make a lot of great stuff. I'm not sponsored by them. I've paid for everything I've had from them, but they make a lot of great sounding things with a lot of interesting presets. And this one is free. So if you go to Cherry Audio, go to products, click here or follow the link in the description, you see the Synthesizer Expander Module. So this is a replication of an ancient piece of kit that if you can find one, it'd probably be massively expensive. And it's I really like it. That's the bottom line. I think this is really cool. I think it sounds really great. It's a bit wacky in a few places, so we're going to look at some of the controls and just get around a couple of bits where you may scratch your head a bit. But that's basically the deal. You just need to sign up for a account with them, and then it will get authorized, etc. So the installation is fairly straightforward. It's pretty easy. And the first time you run it, you need to sign into your account, and then it will finish downloading. And then you'll be at the races. So let's just cut to the chase, get into Cubase and have a look. So here we are in Cubase, and what I've set up is I've got Supervision on the right-hand side with a spectrum at the bottom and an oscilloscope at the top. The oscilloscope in this doesn't trigger particularly well. I think there's more options needed, but we'll just have to deal with it at the moment. And on the left, we've got the thing we're actually here for, the Synthesizer Expander Module. So it's monophonic, so you're only going to get one note at a time. It's pretty interesting because it sounds so good. So if you're after vintage, it's 1970s, 1980s kind of synth sounds, etc., I think this will hit the spot pretty quickly. Whenever I've been playing with it, I'm just thinking of like Escape from New York, etc., that kind of thing. It's just that classic analog synth sound. There's so many good sounds in this. So straight away, let's just look at some of the presets, because for a lot of people, I think this is going to be all you're going to want to do. Just load up a few presets, tweak them, and start making music. So the preset selector is fairly straightforward. You just click up here and then you get these. You can either go through all of them or they are categorized as well. We're not going to go through all of them because it would be a very long video, and all of them are good and useful. It's one of those things where nearly every sound that I've played through, I've gone, oh, that's the beginning of a song, or that works here, or that's something that I've heard previously, etc. So just picking anything will generally be good. But the acid, you've got a great squelchy bass straight away. And if you just tweak, yeah, it's not a 303, but for most people, it's got that really, really great resonance sound. The filters on this sound great. The oscillators sound great. It sounds great. That's the bottom line. Where was another one I really liked? So this almost sounds like a sort of FM bass. It's quite interesting. It's not quite got that hard edge to it, but it's got that hollow sort of bassy sound to it, which I really like, and often it's useful for layering up in a lot of bass synth tracks, etc. So synth punk again, we've moved into the 80s. My amazing octave technique pays off yet again. You get the idea. There's other sounds. So we've got lead sounds, because obviously with something that's mono, you tend to either use it for basses, leads, or as we've seen here, percussion. But again, the lead sounds are the kind of things that just going to work in most mixes. Just instantly sounds great. As far as I'm concerned, anyway. So this highlights the fact there's a built-in echo processor. So, and while it's a simple sound, I think because the oscillators sound good, you instantly get a great sound. So, again, I sound like I'm gushing about this, but I'm really excited about it because it's free. It used to be paid, now it's free. Fantastic. And percussion, again, there's loads of things here. Now, percussion is really useful. I think a lot of pieces of music that I find interesting and producers that I've found interesting over the years have actually used analog subtractive synths as percussion. So you've got all those variations in there and they can program them, make them change. Whereas if you're just using samples, etc., it doesn't live in the same way. There's not that variation and all those little micro variations that make a piece of music interesting. So there's plenty of these to play around with. Pretty wacky. You know, from kicks, etc. And this, after all, is where the original analog drum machines and sequencers, etc., would have had those sounds. They would have been made like this. So they would have used simple synthesizer circuits, subtractive synthesizers to create all those sounds. So if anything, you're being sort of more authentic to the original kind of sound. You've got... We're instantly there, aren't we, really? And a bit of tweaking, you'd get that to fit perfectly in your track. So that's a very quick tour of the presets. We'll just take a quick tour of the controls here and just pick up a couple of the slightly interesting points, which might be a bit of a head scratcher, which is one of the reasons why I'm making this video, partly because I really like this, but also because there's a couple of things where you're like, where's that? Why doesn't that do this? And it's a little bit odd, but then it's authentic to the original. So let's take a look at the controls. So here we are on a brand new patch, and if you just select new, you get this, which is nice just to have that. I mean, I could probably use that as it is, but we'll just take a quick tour. So we've got the master section here where you've got volume, tune, glide. So if you put the glide on, it's not fingered portamento. It's just sliding between them. So I'm not overlapping these notes. So obviously if you take a long time to do that, but a bit of glide often. Is quite nice. The unison, this is great. Make sure you're listening in stereo to this. So that's without. With it on, suddenly we get this fat stereo image. You can obviously go, a bit more swords, kind of crazy trance lead thing, but yeah, just on the default, it just suddenly brings that out into the stereo field really nicely. Next, let's look at the oscillators. So these are a little unconventional not because they do anything in particular weird. So if we just play anything here, the thing you might find a bit weird and is a bit of a head scratcher is the waveform control is in the filter section, because why wouldn't it be? That's how the original was, so that's how it is here. So if you're looking for that for a while, yep, that's where they are. Now, the other thing that's a little odd about this is that these are effectively the mixer control. So if you're looking for volumes for the two oscillators, you won't find them. What you've got is a fader control that goes between sawtooth and pulse for each one. And if you want to turn the oscillator off, then you need to put these controls at the 12 o'clock point. If you do that, you'll get nothing out of them. So if we just play this, you can see we've got these two saws and they are not quite in sync, even though these controls are set to the same and we've got unison off. So there's a bit of detuning and that's why it sounds big and fat. You can hear that phasing. You can see what's happening all over the way here. If you want to sync them up, just turn this on and now you can see they are hard synced to each other. We're just getting our sawtooth, and for those of you who are a bit synth nerdy, you can see that this isn't just a straight line, and that's why this sounds the way that it does, because it's got a curve in there. The frequencies, the harmonics, etc. that are there, so you got your fundamental and all your harmonics, etc. The balance of them is slightly different, and that's why this sounds the way it does. Now, if we put both of these to pulse, so we can just turn them all the way over here, then we get a, in air quotes, square wave. So you can see that that isn't square. It's got a bit of an angle on it. In fact, let's just change this. So the level is just a bit lower so we see the whole thing. So hopefully, yeah, now we can see that. So we see you just got a little bit of an overshoot there and then it drops down. So it triggers off this nicely, which at least means we get to see it properly. That is, again, a classic thing, and that's why this sounds the way it does. If you see a synth where the square wave is genuinely a square wave, it sounds quite different. So you'll still think, oh, that's a square wave, but this is like a nice sounding square wave. In terms of other controls of the oscillators, we've got the overall tuning. So this is octaves here. So if we bring one of these down, even though they're synced together, you can see we get a different effect. And if we go up, then we start getting this. So oscillator 2, is locked to oscillator 1. So depending on what you do with it in their relationship between the two, if this is faster than that, then it will get to do that, but re-trigger again. Supervision is not triggering at all well from this, which is a little bit annoying. It needs better trigger options. But you can see and hear, you get some interesting sounds just by playing around with that. And then you can play around with the pulse width as well. So because we're in pulse, and you can modulate that, which we will see a bit later. But there's plenty to play around with if you're just playing around with this. And what's nice as well is we get to fade between saw and pulse. So if we take this back to 50, if you want to go back to the default value of a control, if you hold down the Option or Alt key, then it takes you back to that when you click it. So that will take us back to where we were. And now, let's say oscillator 2. Let's go back. So you can see we're going back towards a sawtooth. Now, here's where the volume control effectively is. So when you're fading between the two, if you set these to 50%, halfway between, you get nothing. So we're fading up the pulse or we're fading up the saw, but in the middle, we get nothing. So while you haven't got traditional volume controls, you've got this, which allows you to set these. If we set that to 0, we'll get nothing, basically. So we're getting a tiny little bit in there. You can double click and enter a value. And then literally we're getting nothing when we play. So now we can hear just one oscillator. So we can go to saw, or we can go to pulse, and then with them locked together, we can bring this into saw, and then you get those combination of the two. And then if we unlock them, bring that down, you can get some really big raspy sounds. This is starting to sound a bit like Massive does. So there's some interesting things that Massive, certainly the first version of Massive did, which were in this neck of the woods. But again, you know, when they're not synced, we get quite a different effect than when they are. But there's plenty of playing around to do. Now, the modulation here is a little bit interesting, so let's take a look at that next. So the modulation is a little bit interesting because we've got these three choices which are different between VCO 1 and VCO 2, but you've got envelope 1 or envelope 2, off or LFO. So let's just turn VCO 2 off for the moment. So we'll just put that to there. So we're just hearing VCO 1 pretty much. And then we'll play around with this. So you've got two choices, and again, they fade one way or the other, where you can modulate either the frequency or the pulse width. So if we are in pulse mode, which we are here, we go pulse width there. If we go to LFO, you can hear the effect of that. So this is extreme. So we can just get a bit of pulse width in there, and you hear that sound in there. And by changing your starting pulse width, you can alter that around there as well. So there's a fair bit of playing around to do here. You can also do it off the envelope. So if we switch that over to envelope, we'll hear a bit of attack time. So you can hear that changing as the attack of this goes up. So there is quite a bit of flexibility in here. It's not just a straightforward kind of two oscillator synth, because these are quite interesting. So playing around with that. Now the other thing you've got, of course, is pitch. So if we take it over here, frequency, of course, of an oscillator is pitch. So again, because we've got a long attack here, or we can put it on the LFO and get vibrato. And Now it sounds like you've won something on Family Fortunes. Much the same for VCO2, but it's off envelope 2, so you can trigger it from that. So because you've got this flexibility here, you can effectively make these do different things at different times, etc. So while on the face of it, it might not seem that flexible, it's actually got a reasonable amount because of these controls here, and you can pick whether you're changing frequency or pulse width. Now let's take a look at the filter. So the filter is another area where this sounds pretty interesting. So the oscillators and the filters typically are the sound of a synthesizer, and this filter is, I would imagine, quite a faithful recreation of the SEM's original one. Here we are on a new patch, so you can imagine, here's the sound. I'm just going to take VCO2 out. So we just hear the first oscillator. Typical thing to do, just bring this down, and we can hear we've got a low pass filter. Classic, we're again 1970s film territory. And turn the resonance up, we get an even more classic sound. This doesn't go too extreme with the resonance, so it doesn't self-oscillate, it doesn't go crazy, which is probably a useful thing a lot of the time, and I'd imagine this is fairly faithful to the original. We get not only a low-pass filter, we get a high-pass filter, and we can fade between the two. So in high-pass mode, we are filtering the bottom end of the sound, although we're still getting a fair bit in there, and in low-pass mode, we're filtering the top end of the sound, so you can see that those frequencies are what are being affected. We've got a third mode as well, which is bandpass. So if we turn that on, this knob no longer does anything. And then you can hear, and it's getting a bit more extreme. I'm just going to turn that down a bit. Again, even with just those controls, a fair bit to play around with. Now, usefully, we've got modulation, so you've got positive and negative modulation, so it can open this up or close it down. So let's just set envelope 2 up. So just going to put a reasonable amount of attack time on there. And now if we're going to open this up, we'll probably bring this down, and you'll hear the filter open. Or if we wanted to bring it down, let's bring that down. Maybe take that up a bit. And you've got in a classic going dead sound. You'd need to play around with the VCA settings to get it so that if you play a short note, it doesn't get heard again. Because you can hear the filter opening up, etc. But you get the idea with that. There's plenty of possibilities. You can also do it off the LFO. And the final thing in the VCF section, which is a bit strange, is there's a noise oscillator in there as well. So let's just turn this back. So if you want to add that in, so this area here really is typically what would be in sort of VCO or even the amplifier section, but certainly this is sort of more of a mixer than the filter, but that's how the original is, so that's how this one is. So it's nice to have the option to add that in. There's nothing particularly interesting about that other than the fact it gives you options to create particularly percussion sounds or add just a bit of noise in that then you can filter out. So let's take a look at the bottom section of the synth next. So we've already seen some of this. We've got the envelope 1, attack, decay, sustain. So we haven't got an ADSR, we've got an ADS in here. And the release is related to the decay time, I believe. So the two kind of do the same thing. So that makes some sense, but it does limit you to a degree. So sometimes you'll find there's some things you can't do in the way you would do otherwise. Envelope 2 is exactly the same. It's said VCA and VCF, but obviously this can also be sent to this one to here. So we've already seen that can move around. We've got sync here, so you can sync it to the tempo of your sequencer. So we're 120 in Cubase. You can see that flashing away there. We slow this down. You see that slowed down there. So that will just allow you to sync it. And then here is where you get what rate you are relative to the tempo. So if we put this to, let's say, quarter notes. So that will pulse once a second. If we put it to 120, it will be twice a second. 180 will be 3 times a second, etc. So you can see that's linking to there. Pretty straightforward. We can turn the mod wheel control on and off of the LFO. So let's just turn that down. So here we've got the LFO. Let's just do frequency. Now if we put mod wheel control on, without the mod wheel on, nothing's happening. But if I put the mod wheel up on my keyboard, it's doing that. So this allows you to control effectively the level of the LFO using the mod wheel. If you turn that off, it's on fixed. Talking of things being fixed, we've got the amplifier section here can either be from envelope 1, as it says there, or you can just turn it on all the time. And there's some times when that's useful. When you do that, this LED over here comes on, which is part of the original. But you see, as soon as you do that, it's on all the time. It's as if you've got a key pressed down, but then that will give you flexibility in other areas. I'm going to turn that off. So the last area is on the right, which is a couple of effects, which we'll just take a quick look at. So here we are again on a default patch. And first we'll look at the echo. Obviously, we need to turn it on. So we've got echo time here, or you can sync it. So if we sync that, again, we get musical basses. So let's just put it on. Go back to 120 on our tempo. And then let's put it on dotted 8. We've got feedback control and we've got mix. Pretty much all you'd want. But again, it's a nice sounding effect and it's useful to have it in here because you can save it with all your presets. Decays into noise and sort of frequencies disappearing quite nicely when you do that. So that works pretty well. So it's nothing to write home about, but it's nice to have a decent sounding echo built in. And we've got the phaser. So let's turn this on. Again, classic bit of 1970s straight in there. Beautiful. So there's a few other things to cover. Saving presets is pretty straightforward. Once you've tweaked your controls to your heart's desire, you can just click save. You put them in user presets, but you can put them in categories and add a name and keywords. Straightforward, easy to transfer to other machines as well. We've got a few settings you'd need. So if you're using this in standalone mode, you'd probably need to play around with the MIDI settings, etc. But you've got settings under here about general and interface and also your user account that you'd be signed into. But I've not found that I needed to play around with these at all on here. We've got MIDI learn. So by default, this is actually set up to use these controls. These are linked already. So when I used my MPK Mini, you can see these controls are already being done because they are being done by quick controls in Cubase. So you can see here, if you're using this in Cubase, you'll probably find that these quick controls are the same things that you would want to have it controlled by. So we've got volume, frequency of the oscillators, you've got your filter frequency, etc., echo time, master tune, and the modulation amount. So it's pretty useful, and the way it's set up is sensible. But if you want to do it in another DAW, etc., you can just right click or 2-finger tap on anything, MIDI learn, and then tweak the control. It will learn it, and then you'll be at the races. So you can tweak things multiple controls at a time. So you can see here I'm altering the resonance and the frequency at the same time, which is quite useful. Just realised my left and right hands are transposed, so that's why I'm slightly confused about what's happening here. So I've got my right hand is doing frequency and my left hand is doing resonance, and it took a couple of seconds for my brain to work out what was going on. But it all works pretty much as you'd expect. So I think this is a great synth. I think it's permanently free, but certainly I would get it while you can, because if it's not permanently free, it's worth the $30 that they wanted for it, but obviously free is better than that. So that's the Cherry Audio Synth Expander Module. Just thought it was worth pointing out this, A, that it's free, B, that it sounds good, and C, that there's a few little quirks in there which take a bit of head scratching initially to get your head around. But even if you're just using the presets, it's worth taking a look at, but it's also something you can spend a bit of time programming and find some interesting sounds in there. As ever, hope you found this video useful, and if you have, please comment, like, and possibly even subscribe, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.